Okay, thank you everybody for joining us today. Erev Purim, right? We're 2 days before Purim. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Parsha because there's a lot to talk about this Parsha. It's jam-packed, but I also want to talk a little bit about Purim, being that we're so close to Purim. So we're going to try to see if we can combine a few things together. And today we're going to stop at 4:45 for Mincha. And then next week, stay tuned. We have to figure out like a more consecutive time, figure out exactly what Mincha is going to be, if it's before Mincha or after Mincha is a little late, right? I know last year we had the class around 8 o'clock. And I don't know if we're too late. Maybe we'll send out like a survey. So stay tuned to that. We're going to try to figure this out where it's best for everybody regarding the time for the class. Okay, this week's parsha, we're on page 484 in the Article Chumash. It's Parshah Ki Sisa, right? And this, the beginning of this week's parsha speaks about what we read actually 2 weeks ago, right? The Machzis Shekel, the Parshas Shkalim, as we call it, right? When we speak about the Machzis Shekel, the half a shekel, it's the beginning of this week's parsha, and it says, "And God spoke to Moses, saying, Ki Sisa is rosh b'nei Israel, when you elevate, when you count." Ki Sisa literally means when you lift up, but it's referring to when you make a census, when you count the Jewish people. Lipkudehem, for their countings, right? Each person should give a pikadon. Each person should give a gift to God, right? To the mikdash, and it says that should be a machzis shekel. And I'm sort of paraphrasing the few verses over here, and it says truma l'Hashem. It should be a truma to God. Truma is literally means like a gift, like a portion, right? A portion. Truma means a portion, but over here it's referring to a portion from yours to God, to the temple, which is sort of also could be referred to as a gift or as tzedakah or something like that. So I want to talk a few things about the Machzis Shekel, and sort of we'll also tie it a little bit into Purim, right? The first thing is we want to talk about is why did God not allow the Jewish people to be counted just sort of straight away? Why did it have to be that they used a different avenue to count the Jewish people? And we find that by King David also. We find that the Jewish people are not counted like 1, 2, 3, 4, things like that. Right? The Jewish people are counted through something else. We count Machzis Shekel, right? Typically, and when we want to know if there's a menu, we go. Some people go Olam. That's a verse, right? That has 10. Some people say 1 yarmulke, 2 yarmulke, 3 yarmulkes, right? Let's hope everybody has a yarmulke, right? And that way you make sure that it's only people with the yarmulkes for the minyan, right? Okay, we're not going to get into that right now, right? But we don't count. We don't actually count people, right? Why is that? And as we know, it's called Ein Hara, right? Ein Hara. Ein Hara is a sort of the evil eye, right? We don't count the Jewish people because it's an Ein Hara. What does it mean that it's an Ein Hara not to count the Jewish people? So there's a passage in the Talmud, I think it's in Git and Tainus, right? This is sort of my own. There's a lot of different ideas of sort of putting some stuff together, different people, but this is the way I want to bring it out. The Talmud tells us that that before you count your money or your grain, or will be now your money, and before you count your grain, or you could always ask for God to multiply and to increase your grain, right? Your money. But the second that you count it, then you can't pray like that anymore. Why? Because that davar asashim is something that's hidden from your eyes, something that so it's not. It doesn't look as big as of a miracle, right? If it you look at it, oh, it looks like 50 pounds of wheat, right? But so if God makes it 70 or 100, okay, you didn't count. Maybe I was off a little bit, sort of. You didn't count it. Right? But once you count it, you know that it's 50 pounds of wheat, so you can't ask. It's an open miracle. We don't rely on open miracles. And that's the idea of a sort of a concept of Ein Hara to a certain degree. Ein Hara go deeper than that. By a bad eye, you also could make the thing bad, and you could, that's what we say, poo, poo, poo. You've heard that, right? This is not just the Baba Mice, poo, poo, poo. Right? But the idea is sort of, to sort of not to create an evil eye. There is power. We believe there's mystical powers of the evil inclination, the different angels out there, different things that sort of create Or the other idea is, wow, look, people are talking so great about this person, and or how well their kids are, and how much wealth they have, and the evil inclination sort of be awakened to that awareness, right? And it goes to the heavenly court, said, really, does this person deserve this? Right? They did this bad, they did that bad, and therefore that's where sort of a concept of an ayin hara. Right, and a similar flip side of that is, as we said, when if you don't count it, if it's not sort of open to eye, then God could sort of also bless it behind the scenes. So, the idea of not, I believe, and again, there's commentaries elaborate on this, but sort of the idea of not counting the Jewish people, right, is a similar kind of concept, right? When we're sort of behind the scenes of how many people we actually are, again, we do a trick. So if we need to know, we count coins, count this. We're not directly counting. We say, oh, we are this amount of people. The idea is that we are as a nation, we're mystical. We're mystical people, right? We, as we said very many times, we defy the laws of nature, right? We would sort of, we don't believe in vampires and things like that, right? But there is, witches and things, but we are, if you want to say anything about sort of mystical creatures, we're mystical people. We defy the laws of nature. We're still around. And part of that is that we sort of, we stay behind the scenes. There's no need to know exactly how many people we are, right? Baruch Hashem, the Jewish people should keep on going. Bli ayin hara, we should keep on growing. And exactly how many of this, let's not bring it out into the open, right? And then also, when things are not in the open, so the miracles can happen. God can make things work quicker, and more people, more wealth, more health, right? Sort of, we're not sort of being looked upon in that way. That's sort of the idea of ayin hara. So why did God choose the machzis shekel? Right? Why the machzis shekel? We're going to tie this into Purim in a minute. Right? Why the machzis shekel? So the commentaries explain is that that's the whole thing. The machzis shekel, this truma, there's 3 trumas that are mentioned, 3 portions that the Jewish people have to give, mentioned this week's parsha. The machzis shekel is one that everybody has to give the exact same amount, and it has to be a half a shekel. The other ones, people can give what they want. Not everybody's obligated to give, right? It's what you can give, that's sort of your own personal thing. The machzis shekel, what is being used to count the Jewish people from, is exactly that. It's a half a shekel. It's not a full coin, right? It's not something like we all have. Whatever we have, we have to realize it's just half, because the other half is from God. We shouldn't put ourselves out there. We're full. We're this. We're that. We're great. Right? We are people that are b'tznei aleches, as King Solomon says. More than modest, that we spoke about. Modesty doesn't necessarily mean to say like it is. Modesty is what we wear. Right? Modesty is not just for women. Modesty is for men too. Modesty is a way of life. Right? Modesty is a way of looking at things. We live in a more modest way. We don't, as we say, sort of poke out the eyes of the non-Jews. We don't drive around in crazy fancy cars, and we don't build mansions. I mean, unfortunately, some people do, but we don't build things that sort of are out there and talked about, right? We try to stay out of the news. We try to stay out of the paper. We try not to be, even if someone is in the Fortune 500, we just try to stay out of it, as much as we can. That's the idea of being hidden, more hidden. And therefore, the machzis shekel, the half a shekel, says, no, we're all the same. We all have to give. If you're very wealthy, if you're poor, you all have to give the exact same amount. And it's a half a shekel. It's not a full shekel, because that's our philosophy of how we have to look at how we put ourselves out there into the world. And that's the same, and that is the same thing of that we don't want to be counted. So that's what God said, how we should be counted. So how does this tie into Purim? Well, 2 things. First of all, we know that's why we read Parshah Shkalim 2 weeks ago, right? On a practical idea, the machzis shekel went for the karbanos, the sacrifice, the daily sacrifice, which we spoke about last week a little bit. The importance of that. I'm not getting back into that right today. We also don't have enough time for me to sort of elaborate longer. We do have a cutoff time today, right? So the machzis shekel was used for the karbanos for the day. And when did it start over again? Rosh Chodesh Nisan. As we mentioned, Rosh Chodesh Nisan is the beginning of the new year for the months, right? And there's certain halachos for that, and that is also when the new cycle of karbanos. So the taxes had to be collected by Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So they would start making the announcements and start sending people around before the month of Nisan, either sort of giving a month time to sort of collect, the taxes. I know our taxes sort of longer, then you could get an extension. There was no extensions, right? Because you had to have it by Rosh Chodesh Nisan. It's a lot less than our taxes too. It's only a half a shekel, right? But that's in the practical. That's why it's during this time. But on a deeper level, right? We know that Rosh Chodesh Adar also has Purim inside, right? And the Talmud tells us that the shekel that the Jewish people collect, the half a shekel that Jewish people collect, is what sort of went against, or sort of balanced the shekels that Haman, may his name be bolted forever, Haman of Russia, said that he would give Achashverosh and pay for the Jewish people, right? He said, here's the money. Achashverosh said, I don't need your money, right? But he said, here's your money. So the shekel that we collect, right? We collect this sort of balanced side, that we collect the shekel for the karbanos, and that sort of balanced out the sort of the thing that Haman willing to pay to kill the Jewish people. What does that mean? What's a balance that? It's cute. It's shekel. Like, what does that mean exactly? So I saw this beautiful idea and sort of expand on it a little bit. That the idea is like this. The idea is that what was Haman trying to prove? Haman was trying to prove, right, that by willing to pay for the Jewish people, Haman was saying, no, I am someone, right, that is completely materialistic. I am someone that completely is not embarrassed to show off what I have, and on the contrary, he wanted all the fame, right? We know that he sort of started off in the lower end, and he kept on pushing his way up, right, until he became, and he couldn't imagine when Achashverosh asked him who should be honored. Of course, he said it's me. It wasn't him. Right? Of course, it was me. He sort of was someone that's completely full of himself, completely just out there and showing off, and willing to show all his wealth. And he said, look, I'll pay for the Jewish people. What is it going to cost me? A few $1 billion? What is that for? That's nothing, right? I have 10 islands, and I have a few airplanes, and what's that? I can do it. Look, I'm willing to pay for the Jewish people. And that thing that I do, just willing to show off and just be a spender. But the idea of spender was more just to not completely the opposite of Ayin Hara. This completely not have any concept of there's a spiritual world. There's no concept of anything that would I have the money. I have the power. Let me show it off and let me do it. That's what Haman represented, and that's what represented by him willing to pay the money. So by the Jewish people willing to give the half a shekel only, and everybody giving the exact same amount, as we just explained what the shekel represents, right? That energy of the Jewish people, and it wasn't money against money. It wasn't like, oh, we're balancing it out. Who knows? It might not be the same. Who cares? Right? The idea is, it's the concept. The idea of the machzor shekel, as we explained, is the idea that no, we all give you half a shekel. Right? We're all equal. We're not flaunting our money. We're not trying to. We realize that there's a spiritual concept out here. We try to stay more modest. We try to stay behind the scenes. And that's all because we believe that there's a God, and we believe that there's spirituality, and we believe that God takes care of all of us, and we're all in essence, we're wealthy, we're not wealthy, we're really all the same because we're all Jewish people, and we all have a neshama, right? We have a responsibility if we have more money to use that for something good, right? But it doesn't make us anybody better. It doesn't make us more chashiv, any more respectful, and that's not what it is. The materialistic world is not what it's all about. So the energy of the Jewish people every year giving the machzor shekel sort of went against Haman's, right? Trying to show, look, and what he was trying to say is, look, that's what the Jewish people were, and we spoke about this, right? We spoke about this 2 Shabbos ago. When we spoke about the Simcha Purim, right? We spoke about this, that's really the Jewish people were sort of in that muck, right? And that lack of spirituality by going into Achashverosh's party, right? And trying to influence and be part of the culture and say that's what we need. He was sort of, Haman was trying to build all that up and say, look, I have a power to overcome the Jewish people because they're seeping into the materialistic world. They're seeping out of what they really are, the spirituality that they are, and I have that power. And the energy of the machzor shekel, right? saved the Jewish people, and of course with them now connecting to that, and Mordechai and them going and fasting and willing to go fight for their lives, right, and willing to change their ways and say, no, 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 we realize that this is all just hevel, it's all nothing, like King Solomon says, and no, we have to act differently, we have to connect more to our spirituality and be more be more less physical, materialistic, right? But the energy of the Machzor Shekel sort of gave them that energy. That's what it means in the Talmud, that contrast Haman's money and saved the decree. Right? And again, this is something so powerful to think about and to reflect on, that really the avoda that we have to do, and as we go into Purim, and everything that we do on Purim, the drinking, right? I think we're the only religion that has a mandate that we have to drink, of course, respectfully. I don't know if you can, right? We dressing up, right? Giving mishlach manos, matanos avyonim, right? These are all mitzvos, which is sort of a little out of the character of Judaism. Right? Judaism is more like, a little more dry, sort of say, right? God forbid it's not, but it seems like it. We go to shul and we blow the shofar and shake the lulav and we do all that. Yeah, of course, we have dancing and things and we're very exciting, but sort of these things sort of a little bit out of the character. And that is because that's an hapachu. That's really the flip of the Jewish people, that we say, no, 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 we dress up to show that the external world is not it. That's the idea of dressing up. What's the idea of dressing up? I walk in here with a gorilla costume. I'm not a gorilla. I mean, I hope not, right? I hope you guys don't think I'm a gorilla, right? Right? But right? I'm not a gorilla. But that, because there's an external. I'm inside. It's just an external illusion kind of thing, right? It's just an external dress up, right? So my little Ezzy was a policeman today, right? He's not a policeman, but he dressed up like a policeman. Very cute, adorable, right? But so too, when we dress up on Purim, we're realizing that the materialistic world is just an illusion, right? There's nothing to it. It's just what God created for us to be able to connect and to utilize for something spiritual. But there's no essence in it. There's no greatness in it. It doesn't make you better. It doesn't make you the money and whatever it is. It's just tools that you have, and it depends what you do with it. If you think that that's what it is, so then you're in an illusion. You're living your life in an illusion. You're blind, right? But if you realize that it's just a costume, nature is just a costume of God, right? Money is just a costume, and what depends on what you do with it, right? All the fame and things that people get is just an external costume. Then you're able to live Judaism, live like a life of Judaism. That's the miracle of Purim. That's what the Jewish people realize, and that's the dressing up. That's the same thing of drinking. King Solomon says, "Nichnas yayin yatsa soda." One drinks, the essence of the person comes out. We all might know that from life experience, college, or shop Friday night meal, or other times, right, when people drink, right, bars or whatever you guys go, right, to drink, right, we know that. But the idea is also that again, we're trying to say, I've seen people that are quiet and timid or in yeshiva, and then all of a sudden they're talking words of Torah that's beautiful, right? Their essence comes out. It's a similar idea. And when we give a shlach manos, right? Someone says, "Oh, is Purim like a Halloween for you?" I said, "No, Halloween everybody goes and collects candy. We go ahead and we give people things, right? Because we're not trying to take something. We want to give from ourselves. Tzedakah, we want to show that this is what we're utilizing, what we have is to give to other people. Matanis levyonim, it says, Poshet yad noshelo on Purim. Whoever sticks out their hand, whoever asks for money, you have to give to him more than any. You don't have to look their background or whatever. I mean, unless you really, really could think that this person doesn't really need it, but usually you're allowed to do some. It doesn't say you have to give a lot of money, but to poshet yad noshelo, because that's the idea. We're realizing that it's all an external thing. We have to use this external thing for something spiritual. That's the miracle of Purim, right? That's what the Jewish people realize, and that's what the Machzor Shekel represents, right? And that's again the opposite energy of what Haman was trying to accomplish through this, utilizing that money, willing to pay for it, and what Haman represents completely. So that's really the avoda of Purim. That's what the Machzor Shekel is. The service of Purim is for us to continue to reflect internally and say, how could I use the materialistic stuff that God gave me? If it's my money, it's my talent, it's my strength, it's my good voice, right? Whatever it is, how could I use that for something spiritual? How could I use that to help the Jewish people? How could I use that to elevate myself? Because those are just costumes, and it depends on what I do with the costume, if it's going to be a good costume or it's a bad costume. Right? I could be a gorilla and scare people, or I could be a gorilla and jump around and dance and people laugh and have a good time. Right? You could utilize whatever you have for something good, for something bad, and that's really the essence of Purim and the Machzor Shekel. So that's one idea that I wanted to talk about. Any questions or comments? Okay. So the other thing I wanted to talk about, right, is there's a lot. There's a lot in this week's parsha. It talks about the kiyar, right, the vessel that was used to wash our hands, right. It talks about some of the services, the ketoras. We don't have time to go into all this, right. And then it speaks about Bezalel, that God chose Bezalel, right, to sort of lead everything. And then what I want to get into, right, it speaks about Shabbos, right, that's on page 490, right, verse 12, 12, 13, 14, 15, right, and then until sort of the end. It speaks about Shabbos, which is also very important. We talked about that before. I don't want to get into that right now. I just want to say one thing, just as I'm looking through the parsha, just one thing, and then we'll get to the next thing that I want to talk about. I want to make sure we have enough time for it. If you look on page 490, right, verse 15, it's a very interesting verse. It says, we say it all the time, we say it every Shabbos, 6 days you shall do work, and on the seventh day it's Shabbos for Shabbos Shabbosin, the Shabbos of Shabbos, which is holy for Hashem. Whoever does work, but Yom HaShabbos most Yomas. Whoever does work on the day of Shabbos shall put to death. Right? So Rav Moshe Feinstein points something out very powerful, and we could connect a little bit to what we're talking about, and that's why I want to home in on this a little bit. Is very interesting. Why does the Torah tell us 6 days you should do work? I mean, no duh. All it has to say is Shabbos you can do work, right? It just says, "B'yom hashvi," right? The Shabbos Shabbosim, the seventh day is Shabbos, and you can't do malacha. I mean, the Torah has to tell me that every day we should breathe, right? We should drink water and we should eat food, right? I mean, what the Torah doesn't waste an extra word, an extra letter. So why is the Torah? I mean, it's nice, it says Sheish Samim, right? It fits nicely. Maybe it's poetic. Maybe it's like sort of a contrast with 6 days in Shabbos. But what was the purpose of God telling us that 6 days you should do work? So Rav Moshe Feinstein said something very powerful. Says Rav Moshe Feinstein that the Torah is telling us it's not necessarily counted in 613 mitzvot, right? But the Torah is telling us that 6 days you got to do work, right? You can't be sitting on the couch clutching around, right? 6 days you got to do work. I created the 6 days, and you got to go to work. You got to live your lives. If your work is a lawyer, is an accountant, is a doctor, is a organizer, right? Someone's telling me their job is to organize other people's houses. Lucky them, right? I personally am trying to organize my own house. I mean, I think I have a wife that does that. I mean, I try to help her, right? I'm being recorded. Oh my gosh, I'm in trouble now, right? But whatever that job is, right? Whatever it is, if it's taking care of your kids, it's taking care of your grandkids, right? But 6 days you got to work, right? And if it's the work is learning Torah, being a Rebbe, right? That's also part of what your work is, right? Being a kollel, right? But you got to do work. Right? There's a mandate that six days you got to do work, not just whatever. That's the way of the world, and then Yom HaShvi Shabbos Hashem. No, Sheish Yom Tashem Malacha. And what's the idea of this is because again we cannot rely on miracles. We got to live the world. We got to live in the world that we live in. We got to go to work. We got to do our job. We got to be honest in our living. There's a whole section of Code of Jewish Law, Code Mishpah, that deals with business law. Right? Deals with business law, so many different things of interest and this and that and damages, and it's a whole section of Shulchan Aruch that deals with business law, because this is what we have to do. We got to live our lives at a data that we're not, as we mentioned, a famous idea, which a lot of people know. I'll just repeat it over again, sort of ties into this, that Yom Kippur, right? Yom Kippur. How does it? It's Ki, like Purim, right? Like Purim. What does it mean it's like Purim? Right? Yom Kippur is the holiest day of the year, right? But the idea is that we cannot live our lives every day like Yom Kippur. It's a one day sort of recharge the batteries, sort of realize the utopia of what really could be, what our neshama is going to be when we leave this world in the next world. A Yom Kippur like an angel, but that's not practical for everyday life. Purim isn't practical for everyday life. Purim, as we said, the idea of Purim is realizing that we live in the materialistic world, but recognizing that it's the materialistic world and it's the outer shell of the spiritual world. And realizing that everything that is in the materialistic world is there for us to be able to grow spiritually. We need our hands to be able to do mitzvahs. We need our mouth to be able to make blessings and to eat food that's kosher. Right? We need our lips to be able to close our mouth from not speaking lashon hara or not allowing non-kosher food into our mouth. Right? All the things that we have, and the world, we go to business and we make money and we have a good voice, or we are strong, or we work out, or we're healthy. Everything that we have is in order to be able to actually do for the right reason of spirituality. And it's not the physical world for itself, like Haman wanted and what the Jewish people were doing before the switch in the Hapachu. But the Purim story is telling us that we have to live our lives and go to work. 6 days you should do work. But if you do work because God told us to do work, not because I want to make $1 million, and not because I enjoy it, and not because I like putting people in jail if you're a prosecutor, or not because whatever it is, and not because it's good that you enjoy. You should enjoy what you're doing. But I'm going to work because I'm doing it because Hashem wants me to go to work. I'm doing it because God wants me to go to work and to live in the physical world and to make money. But utilize that for something good. Utilize that for spirituality and use everything that I have, all the resources that God gave me for something spiritual, and to realize that the external world is just a shell, just a costume, just an external for the real purpose of our existence is spirituality, right? And that's why it says, and that ties again into what we're talking about on Purim. The work on Purim. The work on Purim is really something that we can live in our everyday life. The work on Purim is something that we are able to connect in everyday life, as we were saying, right? And that's what God tells us. 6 days you shall do work. It's a mitzvah. You'll get a mitzvah by doing work, right? And if you do it for the right reason, then you're going to grow also through doing work during the 6 days. Okay, let's move on. So the next part really takes us to the end of the parsha, right? And this is really, we want to spend weeks on this, right? Because and it is a long parsha, right? And this speaks about the Chet Egel, the sin of the golden calf, right? And just to point out something, if you notice, right, if you go all the way, almost half the parsha is only until Sheni, Shlishi, right? Shlishi, the third aliyah, is on page 504, right? This is the longest Cohen and Levi aliyahs ever, right? It starts on page, it's over 484, right? Chapter 30, verse 11, and it goes to chapter 33, right? Verse 12. So 3 chapters, right? And the reason that is because on page 492, the beginning of chapter 32, speaks about the sin of the golden calf, right? And the sin of the golden calf, we know that the Kohanim, the Levites, were not part of the golden calf, and therefore we don't want a Yisrael who, of course, not all of us, because there was only like 11, I don't remember the exact number, that were wiped out and they were involved, but they somehow got involved. So we don't want any Yisrael to get the aliyah of the golden calf. It's sort of like slapping it in the face, right? Look, even though it's generations ago, but it's a sensitivity, right? So only a Cohen and Levi who were not part of the golden calf, they have those aliyahs. It's sort of not to sort of, it's a lesson of sensitivity that even though it was 3,500 years ago, but our ancestors were some of our ancestors were part of that, or even maybe not our direct ancestors, but our group of ancestors were part of that. So therefore, we don't give a Yisrael these aliyos when it speaks about the Chet Egel, the sin of the golden calf. It's an interesting sensitivity that we should be aware of, right? Why that is, right? Right. We don't have enough time, right, to talk about this. We have like a little less than 15 minutes, right? So it speaks about, let's just sort of, it goes into the golden calf, and we know the story of the golden calf. Moshe went up, and Moshe went up for 40 days. Sort of it returns back to the storyline. And it says, Vayara the nation saw Kivosis Moshe Liyaris. The nation saw that Moshe did not come down. He was sort of delayed from coming down the mountain. Right? So they went to Aaron and they said, come, let's make a God for ourselves, right? And Aaron tried to prolong them, right? So it says that Aaron told him to bring gold, and he put into a fire, and it became an egel, became the golden calf. And they said, oh, we're going to make and they brought sacrifice. We're going to make a holiday tomorrow, right? Now, what was Aaron thinking? And we're going to get into the golden calf in a minute, but the commentaries say that Aaron wanted to prolong them. Usually it takes gold a long time, and then forge it, and then make it into something. But one of the Erev Rav, one of the people that were sort of not to say most of the people that were behind there were really the Erev Rav. Again, as I said, we could spend weeks on this, right? But they threw in Moshe to get Yosef's coffin, and we know Yosef got Yosef's coffin to bring to Eretz Yisrael, but they put it on the bottom of the Nile River. So Moshe wrote with God's name, right? Bachar Shar, right? An ox, right? Because Yosef is compared to an ox, and I don't remember exactly what was written on there, but something like that, and it was God's name on there. And one of the Erev Rav somehow got a hold of it. Of course, the Satan, the evil inclination, was involved in him finding it. And he threw it into the fire, and since there was God's name on it, and there was, Thomas said that, therefore, it happened instantly that the calf, the golden calf, came out from that. So Aaron really had good intentions in trying to prolong them and trying to, just bring gold. It'll take time, and then Moshe will come down. He knew there was this off by a half a day. So Aaron had good intentions, but at the end of the day, still the golden calf was made. God tells Moshe to go down because the Jewish people sinned, right? And Moshe, this again belonged to Moshe. God wanted to destroy the Jewish people. We read this parsha also on a fast day, right? That Moshe pleads for the Jewish people, the merit of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Right? We don't have time to elaborate so much on this, right? It says that God wanted to say, I'll start a whole new nation just with you. He said, well, if the merit of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, 3 legs, can't survive, so then how is it going to survive just with 1 leg if later, right? That's part of why he was invoking them. Right? Again, there's a lot behind here. Finally, it says that he went down, right? And he broke the tablets. When he saw it, he broke the tablets. And it says the letters went up to heaven. And then he smashed the egel, and he burnt it, right, and turned it into ashes, right? And then he said, Mila Shem Alai, who's for me, to God. And the tribe of Levi rose up, and they went and they killed their own brothers and sisters. What do you mean their own brothers? If they're Levites, so it means to say brother-in-laws, or brothers from the same mother, but not from the same father, right? If there were half siblings, right, it goes into that, right? And then Moshe goes up again and asks for forgiveness for the Jewish people, right? He goes up for another 40 days to ask for forgiveness, and then we know that God tells him that forgiveness, and then that's actually Shavasa, the 17th of Tammuz, is actually when the golden calf happened, right? That's when Moshe went down first time, and then Moshe comes back up for another 40 days, and he comes up on Rosh Chodesh Elul, right? And that's when God told him forgiven, and then he goes back up another 40 days to get the second tablets, and that's Yom Kippur is the end of the last 40 days, and the completion of the forgiveness, and that's why that day became a day of forgiveness, because that's when the second tablets God told him to write a new luchos. No, he went up that's when this first time he went up was on Shavuos, right? And then he was up for 40 days, but the Jewish people sinned on the 17th of Tammuz, right? And that was a half a day short because they weren't counting the right way, right? Then he went back up the next day, right? And that he came back down on Rosh Chodesh Elul, right? And he got forgiveness. And then he went back up again for they received the second tablets and the second luchos, and he came back down on Yom Kippur, right? And that was the final forgiveness, right? Sort of just to wrap up very quickly, we only have a few more minutes, right? Then it says that God tells Moshe that he forgives him, right? Moshe moves his tent away, right? And then it says that that's Moshe speaks about. Moshe asked God if he could see his face, and God tells him, "No, you can only see my back." All right, I think we spoke about this last week. I think that's the idea of Amuna, right? Or maybe I was speaking to someone else. I don't remember anymore. Sorry. Right? I don't have time to go into that. Just the idea of what Amuna means, right? And then God tells him to build the second tablets. We're on page 506. Build the second tablets, right? And then there is a famous notes of Chesed La'alafim. Again, Moshe invokes the 13 attributes of mercy, right? That's where Moshe invokes the 13 attributes of mercy. And where did he get that from? It says one of the angels told him as a gift when he went up the first time. There's a lot going on over here. It's a really jam parsha, right? And then sort of at the end, it sort of goes and continues with other things sort of continue. Moshe comes back down, and it says there's a glow on his face, and Aaron can't look at him. Right, the Moshe covers his face, right, and when he speaks to the Jewish people. Sort of again, it's a very quick overview. There's a lot more to talk about, but I want to home in on one idea of sort of the next sort of 6 minutes, or I guess until people actually walk in from Mincha, right? Because we don't have to stop until they're actually ready to daven, right? So to sort of just, I want to home in a little bit on how could the Jewish people go from such heights of hearing the first of the Ten Commandments or all the Ten Commandments at one time, or whatever it is, right? Such heights, such high spiritual level to going and willing to serve a golden calf, right? Complete idol worshiping. How could they go from such height to such low, right? And it just seems very hard. Like, really, we would never do that, right? We wouldn't serve idols, right? Like, we won't do that. So first of all, we have to understand, and we're not getting into this, but we have to understand that there's a different level of Yetzer Hara for idol worshiping than we have now. And the rabbis sort of asked, it says, the rabbis at the beginning of the Second Temple era prayed that God should remove the intensity of the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination for idol worshiping. Part of that has to do with because God created the world, Zelu Maseh. God created the world on a balance. If there's more potential of spirituality, right, there has to be the same potential of intensity of negative spirituality, right? The less. So we know we also have less. That beginning of the Second Temple era, prophecy stopped, right? There was no prophecy during the Megillah, during the story of Megillah. There were some prophets, right? But we don't see like the prophet came and said, right? It doesn't call Mordechai a prophet. Mordechai was not considered a prophet, right? But we know that, and sort of the beginning of the Second Temple era, there was a sort of just an overflow from the beginning of the Temple era, those prophets, and then there wasn't any more prophets. There was the rabbis and this. So the prophet sort of had a more direct line with God. So again, it had to be more of an even balance. And of course, if there was a greater level of knowledge of God by the giving of the Torah and Kriyas Yamsuf, so it's sort of a greater level of intensity of wanting to serve idols. So that's just, it's a side thing that I want to, important fact to know. There's many different ideas that's brought down. One of the ideas I want to talk about, and also connects a little bit to Purim, and we'll end with this, is that, and I think I might have mentioned this in one of the sermons. I don't remember if I spoke about this in the sermon I gave 2 weeks ago about Simcha and Purim, and it could be, but it's good to repeat, that the Jewish people's whole level of spirituality was not theirs. It was not theirs. It was something that was given to them. It was something that was sort of thrown at them. It was a gift. Right? They didn't really work. Yes, there was 49 days that they had to work and to work on themselves, but it was 49 days that were just sort of, it's a blink of an eye in a lifetime of someone to be such high level. They had the splitting of the sea, and they had the Makos, and they had the great clouds of glory, and then they heard God's presence, and they said you could see the light, the thunder, and you could hear the lightning. It was defying the laws of nature. So no doubt, of course they're going to serve God. No doubt they're going to have a level of spirituality that we can't imagine, right? Because it's sort of given to them. They can't imagine otherwise, right? And says, I forgot who it is. I think it's from Levitz. It could be someone else, right? I think it might be someone else. And says that when something's not given to you, when something is sort of when something is just given to you, and so not something that you work on, as we know, the famous saying, "Easy come, easy goes," right? When it's, of course, they cared about it, and of course, it's not like they disrespected it, like sometimes our kids do, like they think like they just deserve everything, right? If they don't work for it, right? But of course it wasn't like that. But the second that their faith was being tested, and the evil inclination put Moshe's casket up, the Medrash says Moshe's casket was floating, and said, "Oh my gosh, Moshe was dead." And remember, their whole connection to spirituality was really through Moshe. He's the one that took them out. They had like a slave type of mentality that they were sort of just relying on Moshe. They were slaves a month and a half ago, right? Whatever, okay, maybe a year ago, depends how long the plagues were, right? But they were sort of still relying on that. So their faith was being tested on the highest level, but they didn't have really any roots or any foundation to rely on, because it was sort of just given to them. And as we say, easy come, easy goes. Right? So it says the commentaries, that's why the evil inclination is able to just sort of topple the whole building. Right, sort of just crash down, right? Because it wasn't anything that nothing that they really worked on. It wasn't anything. I'm not saying that they didn't work on anything, but it wasn't really the level that they were on was not something that they sort of made themselves, or sort of something that was given to them. And the commentaries, I forgot who says this. I remember seeing this once, and I don't remember where, but say that that's really the deeper explanation of when it says, the Talmud tells us that Kaf Aleim Har Kigus, God lifted the mountain of Kigus and put it over their head and said, if you accept the Torah, good. If not, Sham Tieh Karaschem, this will be your burial ground. So the Jewish people said, of course we're going to accept the Torah. What do you mean that God really did that? So then it wasn't their free will. It was like, okay, so we needed to do that because otherwise the world would turn. Okay, there's a lot of different explanations. But I heard this beautiful idea that really what it means is that means to say it was as if there was a mountain over the head, because the Jewish people didn't really have free will to accept God. Of course, they made the decision. There wasn't a literal mountain, but since that such an intensity of spirituality that was being thrown at them, splitting of the sea, seeing thunder, right? The 10 plagues, clouds of glory, the fiery cloud that was leading them on the way, right? They were sort of, it was as if their free will was taken away from them because they had to accept it. There was such a level of spirituality, such a clarity of God that was being shown to them, right? Of course they have to accept it, right? They just had no choice, right? The example I like to give is that if I pour a cup of Drano and pour it into a cup, right? And I say, here, you want it, right? You're going to say, no way. Do you have free will to take it? In theory, you do have free will. Practically, you have no free will because you saw me pouring Drano into the cup. You can't rationalize it any other way. That they say that, some commentators say that's what it means that God put a mountain over their head. It wasn't literal. But it was as if they didn't have any free will. And so the second that sort of went away and they're back to their daily lives, and then something rocks, right? 40 days, yes, it's 40 days later, but sort of it shakes their core. They have no foundation to go to it, right? It says the Talmud, right, that by Purim, Kimu v'kiblu Yehudim, when it says that Jews Kimu v'kiblu, kiblu masher kiblu kvar, the Jewish people reaccepted the Torah, it says ma'ava, from love. Now, what does it mean, ma'ava, from love? Peace, yeah, beautiful love. No, what it means from love means to say they accepted it because they worked on accepting it, because they toiled over it and they made it their own. And that's a true ava, that's a true love, that's a true accepting of the Torah. Because as we said, the Purim story has no magical thing on it. Right? That we elaborate on this. No magical thing. God's name is not in the Megillah. There's, it looks like the activity was over a 10-year plan. But they realized, they worked on it, and they realized that no, the Torah is right. They realized that God's way is right. Everything, spirituality is really the main thing, and not the physical world. So they reaccepted the Torah with love, with a solid foundation that the Torah now is with us forever, and there's nothing that can make us, nothing that can rock us the way it rocked us like that over there. And that's why by this Kate Egel sort of toppled, because it didn't work on it, it didn't have the chance to. It was sort of given to them. But that Purim story, they worked on it, and that's what it means, a new acceptance of the Torah. And just on a deeper level, say the commentaries, that's why God did not, that's why there's no prophecy, because God said I don't need prophecy anymore. because prophecy is a level of connection which sort of is given to you. Of course, if someone talking to God and I believe in that, of course, right? It's not something that I'm working on. It's not something that, so, but now that the Jewish people accepted the Torah, they don't need prophecy. And it continues. That's why we also see that the Talmud and the Mishnah and the sort of the whole way of learning changed because of this, right? Because the whole framework of our relationship with God and our acceptance of the Torah changed dramatically because of this. And that's another lesson that we can learn from Purim, right? And a difference from the Chet Egel. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and wishing everybody